The world is moving fast, and so are we. I'm Emma Hurt, here with the stories you need to know. The Trump administration is doubling down on diplomacy with Iran, sending top envoys to Pakistan this weekend for high-level peace talks. President Trump announced a ceasefire extension earlier this week, and Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will meet directly with Iran's foreign minister to pursue further de-escalation. Oil markets are watching closely, with prices holding steady at $105 per barrel as renewed hope for a breakthrough caps further upside. And still on this, the scale of these Russian attacks raises serious questions about Ukraine's ability to defend itself long-term. Our Washington correspondent Marcus Webb is following developments from the region. Marcus?
Well, Emma, what we're seeing here is a really significant escalation. Russia fired more than 660 drones and missiles in a single overnight attack Friday, killing at least 7 people and wounding over 30 others. The strikes hit cities across Ukraine, particularly Dnipro in the east, where rescue teams are still pulling people out of the rubble. And here's the thing. This isn't just about the immediate casualties. It's a demonstration that Russia's still got substantial firepower, despite months of conflict.
What does this mean for Ukraine's ability to sustain its defense?
Look, every attack like this drains Ukraine's air defense ammunition faster than it can be replenished. They're asking the West for more Patriot systems and long-range air defense, but the reality is they're burning through interceptors at an unsustainable rate. Meanwhile, Russia seems to have learned to produce drones faster than analysts predicted. If this pattern continues, Ukraine could face serious gaps in coverage within months.
Marcus, appreciate the reporting. The Trump administration is also facing new scrutiny over how it's screening immigrants based on their political views toward Israel. Our Washington correspondent Marcus Webb has more on how the State Department is handling green card applications. Marcus?
Well, Emma, immigration officers have been given new guidance that describes participating in pro-Palestinian protests and criticizing Israel as overwhelmingly negative factors in green card applications. It's a significant shift in how the administration is vetting people seeking to become permanent residents. The guidance essentially flags political speech on Israel as a disqualifying factor, which raises real questions about First Amendment protections for immigrants.
So how are immigration attorneys responding to this policy?
Look, civil rights groups are raising alarm bells here. I mean, this basically penalizes people for exercising free speech rights before they even become citizens. The policy could chill political expression among immigrant communities and puts immigration officers in the position of making judgments about people's political ideology rather than their security risk or criminal background.
Marcus, appreciate the reporting. The United States is taking direct aim at China's oil trade with Iran, sanctioning one of Beijing's biggest refineries just ahead of a crucial summit. Our Middle East correspondent Layla Nazari has more on what this means for the region. Layla?
Well, Emma, thanks. So the U.S. Treasury just came down hard on China's Hongli refinery for buying Iranian crude oil under the table. What's interesting is this refinery is massive. It's one of the world's largest independent processors, and Treasury says it's generated hundreds of millions of dollars for Iran's military over time. The whole operation works through these shadowy middlemen and fake shipping documents to hide where the oil's actually coming from.
Why would China risk angering Washington over this right now, with the Trump summit coming up?
Look, here's the thing. For Beijing, Iranian oil is cheap and reliable. China needs energy, and Iran needs the cash, so they've built this whole underground network to keep it flowing despite U.S. sanctions. But timing-wise, yeah, this is a power play. Trump's team is basically saying to Xi, cooperate on Iran, and we'll talk about tariffs. Beijing's going to push back because they don't love being told who they can trade with, but they might offer some small concessions just to keep the broader negotiations moving.
Layla Nazari, thank you.
Remaining with the world, the Strait of Hormuz shutdown threatens global energy supplies, with roughly 20% of the world's oil passing through the choke point daily. The U.S. Navy is now using unmanned drones to clear Iranian mines from the Waterway after retiring its traditional minesweepers. Watch for major oil price movements and any escalation between American and Iranian naval forces in the coming weeks. Continuing on world, Mali faces a serious security crisis as armed militant groups launched coordinated attacks across the country Saturday. The army reports attacks on military positions in the capital Bamako and several interior towns, with gunfire confirmed near the international airport. Watch for updates on casualty numbers and whether the government can contain the assault across multiple locations. Continuing on world affairs, the U.S. Justice Department's decision to expand execution methods raises significant questions about criminal justice policy and international human rights standards. Our world affairs correspondent James Chen has more on what this means globally. James?
Well, Emma, the DOJ announced Friday it's bringing back firing squads, gas chambers, and lethal injection for federal executions. They're saying this will strengthen the death penalty and deter crime. But here's the thing, the U.S. is already pretty much an outlier on this. Most developed democracies abolished capital punishment decades ago.
How are other countries likely to react to this?
Look, it's not going to sit well with our European allies or Canada. I mean, the European Union and most Western nations view capital punishment as incompatible with human rights. What's interesting is, this could actually complicate U.S. diplomatic relationships, especially on issues where we're trying to lecture other countries about their justice systems.
James, appreciate it. Moving to the markets, America's energy sector is capitalizing on Middle East instability, but global allies are hesitant to lock in dependence on U.S. supplies. Conflict in Iran is reshaping oil and gas flows, and analysts warn there's high risk betting on any quick political resolution. Watch for signs of whether Europe and Asia will commit to American energy or pursue other alternatives. A major Supreme Court ruling on voting rights could reshape electoral maps across the country, and Mississippi's Republican governor is already preparing for that change. Tate Reeves announced Friday he'll call a special legislative session within 21 days after the court rules on a landmark redistricting case. What happens in Jackson could set the tone for how states redraw voting boundaries nationwide. Now, our in-depth analysis of the day, the story dominating the headlines, examined from every angle. We are 53 days into a conflict that has closed the Strait of Hormuz, sent oil prices surging $15 a barrel in a single week, and now produced a diplomatic collapse in Islamabad that nobody quite saw coming. Or maybe everybody did. The second round of U.S.-Iran peace talks was supposed to happen this week in Pakistan, but the delegations never met, and the world is now left asking whether this was a failure of diplomacy or a calculated power play. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Emma. Good to be here. Look, what happened in Islamabad this week is significant. Not just because the talks collapsed, but because of how they collapsed. You had American C-17 military transports already on the ground in Pakistan. J.D. Vance's press pool was literally staged at Andrews Air Force Base waiting to board. This wasn't a quiet diplomatic retreat. This was a very public, very deliberate signal from Washington. And I think the key question now is whether Trump extended the ceasefire indefinitely because he genuinely wants a deal, or because he's decided the blockade and the military pressure are working well enough that he doesn't need to offer Iran a face-saving off-ramp just yet. The Fox News reporting from Islamabad made clear that Iran hadn't publicly committed to sending anyone, and the former CIA station chief, Dan Hoffman, flagged something that worries me more than the summit collapse itself, which is the intelligence picture on Chinese resupply. If Beijing has been shipping manpads and ballistic missile components to Tehran during the ceasefire window, that changes the battlefield calculus significantly when this thing restarts.
Sophia, what is the economic picture telling us right now? Because Brent at $105 is extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, yes, and the number that really jumps out is that $15 weekly gain. That's not a market reacting to noise. That's a market pricing in genuine fear. What's interesting is that we're actually sitting below the $110 threshold. And the reason for that, according to oil price reporting, is specifically the hope around the Islamabad talks. So here's the paradox. The talks collapsing should push oil higher, but the ceasefire extension is doing just enough to keep a lid on it, for now. The Strait of Hormuz stays closed, the blockade continues, and every day that goes on, the pressure on global energy markets compounds. And then you layer on top of that what Foreign Affairs is flagging, that Trump goes into his Beijing summit next month, already weakened by this crisis, which means China has leverage on trade, on fentanyl, on the South China Sea, all of it. The economic and geopolitical threads here are genuinely inseparable.
Marcus, final thought. Realistically, where does this go from here?
My assessment is that we're heading for the middle scenario, a frozen conflict that neither side can afford to end cleanly or escalate openly. The CBS analysis from Sam Vinograd made a point I keep coming back to, which is that we don't actually know if whoever Iran is sending to these back-channel conversations has real authority within Tehran's fractured power structure. That's not a small problem. That's potentially a fatal one for any agreement. Look, Pakistan still wants this deal because their rehabilitation as a regional power depends on it. The ceasefire is indefinite, and both sides have domestic audiences they're playing to. I think we see more rounds of this, talks that almost happen, ceasefires that keep extending, until one side's internal politics forces a decision. The worst case, and I don't want to dismiss it, is that Iran plays what it's calling its new military cards, and we're back at war before Trump reaches Beijing. That would be a very bad week for everyone.
Thank you both. Marcus, Sophia, really important context tonight. Appreciate it. The United States and Iran are locked in a diplomatic standoff that is as fragile as it is consequential. A contested ceasefire, a naval blockade, seized ships in the Strait of Hormuz, and a White House insisting it holds all the cards, even as alarming questions emerge about the true cost of this conflict to America's military readiness. Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Emma. Look, the headline number here that we can't ignore is what this war has cost America in sheer military hardware. 11,000 Tomahawk cruise missiles, over 1,200 Patriot interceptors, and roughly 1,100 of the long-range stealth missiles that were specifically stockpiled for a potential confrontation with China. That's not a footnote. That's a strategic alarm bell. And the Pentagon itself is reportedly telling Congress it could take 6 years to fully replace those stockpiles. Now, the administration's counter-argument is that the blockade is working. It's costing Iran $500 million a day, and Trump is holding the leverage. That's a credible position, but leverage and readiness aren't the same thing, and right now both are being tested simultaneously.
James, from your perspective, what does the wider strategic picture look like here, particularly given what Foreign Affairs is saying about China's position?
Well, I think the phrase that keeps coming back to me is from Foreign Affairs. The Iran war is a win for China. And honestly, it's hard to argue with that framing. Every day this drags on, the U.S. burns through assets it would desperately need in the Taiwan Strait, while Beijing watches and takes notes. Trump is reportedly heading into a meeting with Xi next month, and he's going to be doing that with a depleted munitions inventory and allies in Europe who are quietly, or not so quietly, alarmed about what this means for NATO's eastern flank. The Iran leadership presenting a unified front publicly, even as Trump says they're fighting like cats and dogs, that contradiction matters because it means the diplomatic timeline is completely unpredictable.
Sophia, final thought. Where does this actually go from here?
My assessment is that we're heading toward a partial deal, not a comprehensive one. The economic pressure on Iran is real and it's mounting. You can't absorb $500 million a day in losses indefinitely. But the blockade is itself the sticking point because Tehran won't negotiate seriously while it's in place, and Washington won't lift it without concessions. That's a circular trap. What Foreign Affairs describes as a comprehensive deal, covering nuclear capacity, regional proxies, the whole architecture, that's years away if it happens at all. The most likely outcome in the near term is a frozen conflict managed through back channels. And in that scenario, China and Russia have already won the waiting game.
Thank you both. Sophia, James, really important analysis tonight. Appreciate it. Stay curious, stay informed. I'm Emma Hurt, and that's your World News Update. We'll be back soon.